Hey folks, it's Jeremy. You're listening to Blamo. How we doing? Is it the holidays? Are we listening to this during the holidays? I don't know. When do you even start saying Happy Holidays or Merry Christmas or Happy Thanksgiving or Happy Hanukkah, whatever it is? But I don't know when we kick this thing off. I mean, I don't know. I was driving home this week, and so many folks, like for real, so many folks had their holiday decorations up. I mean, we got lights, we had Baby Yoda, we had Santa. Actually, I stand corrected. Grogu. We had Grogu on the lawn. Whatever. I don't have anything up. I don't have any lights. I don't have any Christmas decorations. I don't have any turkey stuff. I don't know. It's not that I don't care. I got a lot of stuff going on, you know? I'm talking to you guys. I'm making pods. I'm raking leaves. I'm doing all that crap. I mean, I'll tell you one thing, though. I am going to watch White Christmas about 600 times because I freaking love that movie. Yes, the music's good, you know, but man, Bing Crosby, Danny Kaye, the Fitz, they're so good. They really are good. Like, I would encourage you the next time you watch it. It's funny. I don't know. If you follow me on Instagram, every year I'm always like sending like screen caps of like my favorite scenes in White Christmas. Because the style is off the wall. These dudes had, you know, they had the high-waisted vibes, but they just looked so good. It was good. Speaking of looking good, my guest this week, Mr. Erik Allen Ford, co-founder and CEO of Buck Mason. I'll be honest, I've really been admiring Buck Mason a lot lately. And yes, I'm sure, you know, many of you have probably purchased something from them or know someone who has for years. But I don't know. I feel like they're just making some great stuff right now. I mean, the truth is they always have been, but, you know, recently, like this Eddie Bauer collection, the denim, it's good stuff. So Erik and I chatted. We discussed his life growing up in rural Missouri. Look, yeah, I didn't know that either. Denim in the early aughts, American manufacturing, moving back to the Midwest, and building what you want to wear yourself. All right, it's Blamo. Here's my chat with Erik Allen Ford. Let's go. Thanks for making the time. I know, Erik, you're a pretty busy guy these days, running a massive company. So, yeah, I really appreciate it.
I don't think, definitely not massive.
I don't know.
But
Fooled me. I mean, it's funny because it's been really interesting to watch, you know, Buck Mason go from, and you know, and this is not a knock, to go from a brand that appeared on Shark Tank to now being a brand that is like more or less discussed amongst, you know, my snobby peers in the fashion industry, where it's like,
oh my gosh,
you know, where it's like, actually, there's some good stuff going on over there. I mean, I was in one of the stores in New York. I mean, just looking through the product and stuff. And I want to say this to kind of clear the air. Like, this isn't like, man, I'm really surprised, you know, didn't believe in you. I'm not that surprised because you have a great team around you, but I just get excited to see, you know, a newer air quote brand do great stuff. And I think sometimes I get a little burnt out. While I love Ralph Lauren, I love, you know, all the classics. Sometimes you're like, I'd like to see a new brand try to, you know, give their take on it. So it's very exciting and refreshing to watch you all just kind of crush it. So congrats.
Well, thank you so much. I think that it's sort of weird to be public from inception as a brand. Okay, think about like a musician. Mm-hmm. When you're starting off in those first few years, it's just like you in a room. You know, nobody's like critiquing what you're doing.
Yeah, fair.
And you know, so one thing, like when we started in 2013, I mean, you're just trying to figure out like which way is up, right? But everything that you put out is public, you know? So of course, like if I go back and look at like our Instagram from 2013, I'm like cringing at everything that I see, you know? But that's everyone, right? I don't know if you do that with your pod and listen, I'm sure your first episodes were great,
absolutely.
But they're not as good as they are now, right? And
yeah, I know exactly what you mean.
Yeah, so it's funny like you mentioned Shark Tank because that was such a difficult decision with my partner and I, Sasha, and we didn't have any capital for marketing, right? We didn't have $5 million from a venture capital firm to like try to go out and buy Facebook ads. So we thought, well, we're going to probably look really goofy. And, you know, it's like the dorkiest thing you could possibly do. Mm-hmm. But like, maybe we'll get some customers. And then there's the question of like, you know, are you going to put as seen on Shark Tank on your website? You know, so of course not, right? So you want to you basically want nobody to know that you went on Shark Tank. And hope that like GQ and Esquire and like all the people don't know that it happened. But then, of course, why not take 500,000 new customers from the middle of America and, you know, like a Kickstarter per se. So yeah, it's a wild decision. And that was a successful one. But clearly, since we're talking about it here, people knew about it.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I think, Bombas did the same thing. I mean, Randy's a good friend of mine and they were on Shark Tank. And I think it's interesting too, because it's almost like a pejorative term to say that. But what's interesting to me in the ones that really, really blow up are the ones that, yeah, like you were saying, you don't have as seen on Shark Tank on your website, but you know, like the ones that are like, okay, it was a way to get investment. Yeah. Like I didn't have to go through, I don't know, Y Combinator or some sort of thing. I mean, no shots to Anderson Horowitz, but like, you know, it wasn't the traditional thing. And also, yeah, all the marketing that you get. And it's, you know, the biggest thing I want to talk about with you other than just kind of like your daily life is I think that as someone who lives in the Midwest now, you know, I lived in New York for, I don't know, 16, 17 years. I'm now back and forth between New York and St. Louis. The brands that I really see where people patronize and get into across the United States are the ones that pay attention to the rest of the United States.
Yeah.
And
yeah, absolutely.
You know, it's like, I talk about this all the time. Like my brother-in-law, I love him to death. And he's a guy who he's not so much looking for some sort of mystique across everything. You know, he purchases clothes from a very utilitarian mindset where it's like, I need a jacket. What's a good jacket? It's here. I'll buy the jacket. I'll buy it in 10 colors, but I need it. It can't change. And I have to, it's basically like crossing it off your list. The same way someone's buying like soap and eggs, you know, or whatever at a grocery store. A lot of these guys, you know, in the Midwest and, you know, across the United States are purchasing clothes that way. And they're purchasing 100x more than some snobby guy like me who is very lucky to just get discounts from all the brands anyway, you know? And so when I see brands like what you all are doing and you're paying attention to the entire United States and you're not making things so difficult to understand and it's very warm, it's very approachable, I'm like, yeah, this is how you do it. Like, so.
Well, I think the dream is to be able to build a product that can resonate with middle America or just the normal guy who needs a jacket. Yep. And that exact same piece, if I can also get you, because you recognize the details, you know, you're like, oh, that's actually like 1950s Biggie replica. And they actually paid attention to the details. It's not necessarily a repro, but it's a version of a repro that you can respect because you know that we paid attention to the right details. And then my brother-in-law, who sounds just like yours, amazing guy, he's like, this is a great pair of jeans. That's it.
Yeah.
And end of story, right? Like these fit me well and they like feel good out of the wash. That's the dream. It just happened. We opened a store in my neighborhood. I live in the Midwest too. Well, Pittsburgh. And the first sale of the day we opened the store was to a friend of mine, very like just normal, once good clothes. And he buys this corduroy chore jacket. Mm-hmm. Towards the end of the day, this is so weird, but one of my favorite architects has just moved to Pittsburgh and he came to the opening. I'd never met him before. He's amazing. And the jacket he was most excited about was the same piece that that we'd opened the day with. And it's kind of that example of like, you know, you're sort of threading the needle.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think, you know, so how intentional was this across the board in the sense when you look at your design and your storytelling and even your site where it's like, hey, we can't be too inside baseball or, you know, what's that thought process like?
Yeah. I mean, I think you're basically assembling a group of people that are the same type of weird as you, right? Like everyone's obsessed with... Everyone's obsessed, right? And my obsession level is actually quite moderate because and which makes sense. Like I'm more of a generalist and need to be keep after kind of the vision and the be a little bit more of a big picture player in the mix. But our team, I mean, the obsession level it's intense, and so you're following their passion, right? they have ideas and they are, so particular about what they want to create, and you're following their passion. So it really starts with that. But I do think that because everyone is the same type of weird in that they're obsessed with timelessness, they're obsessed with the classics, right? You don't really get in the door if that's not your jam. So that helps, I think, connect with normal folks.
Yeah.
I mean, the classics are the classics, So I think that that's part of how it works. It's not so much like, oh, we have to take that detail off because it's too.
Oh, okay.
You're not like, there's not much merchandising, weirdly enough. Like, we're design led. So you don't have a merchant in the room talking about like pops of color or whatever, all that stuff. Like, that's not our thing, It's totally design led. And it usually starts with vintage. And the cool thing about that is that these are pieces that have, there's a history. And so the normal guy, can understand a really great 5-pocket jean or, a really great Oxford or whatever. And so, but the design team does have carte blanche to like go as far as they want to go. Like they're able to express themselves fully. It's just that the taste level is generally leaning towards timelessness.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's a really thing that you said, and that you're more design led, because you're right. There's a lot of other brands that really, I think sometimes when you receive the product and it's not in the environment that you saw the product in, the product is like really lifeless, right? Which is like one of the challenges of e-commerce that I think every brand tries to do. And it's like, well, online or in our store, you see this product and we built this entire world around it. And there's this character, this man, this woman, whomever, and they're really embodying this lifestyle. And so you have this car and all of these things. And then the person gets excited by it. They purchase the product. It arrives in their house in like a toilet box, tissue paper, whatever it is. And they're like, oh, bummer. And it also feels like it. I mean, I think that's the thing too. Because right. I mean, I have a bunch of Buck Mason stuff, and I was wearing the thermal. I was wearing it around, and my wife saw it, and she was like, "This is really, really nice." Like, she's like, "This is really beautiful." And for my wife to make that comment, because she sees me surrounded by clothes all the time, I was like, yeah, there's a lot more to it. And I mean, I think it makes me wonder too, like why other brands aren't really trying to think this way. Because I'm sure they are, but it is a danger, and I won't call brands out, when you see the whole lifestyle and you get the product at your door and you're just like, oh, bummer.
Yeah, I mean, I think it all ties back to sort of like first principles thinking. Because if you start with an incredible pattern,
sure,
like if you have the best pattern maker in the world, and that's where you start, and then your design and PD team, they're going to go out and source a fabric like that thermal that you. I think it's like it's sort of a flat, smooth inside.
Yeah,
and it's like double faced. Yeah. It's really nice. And I actually remember developing that fabric 4 or 5 years ago with the team. And it's like if you have this pattern maker and then you have this design team, and you're going out to build something that's sort of emotional, like as a team, and maybe there are 4 or 5 key players that are going out to build this emotional product. It's just such a different experience versus like, oh, we need a thermal in the collection, because those do 4% of total volume in the knitwear category or whatever, and of course that's not going to be it wasn't an emotional decision to even make a thermal, right? It was like it was just it was about sales.
Right.
And so like, I think sort of just turning the whole thing on its head and being first principles minded, it just turns out emotional product. And I have to say, I think you mentioned Ralph earlier, like the greatest at building emotional product. I mean, I haven't shopped that much at Ralph recently, but growing up, I did feel like those products were emotional beyond the campaigns. Like the actual product I got held up to the campaign, and I think that's what we're trying to do.
Yeah, I mean, on the Ralph stuff, they're also in this unique position now in which they can sell nostalgia with their own brand because of how long they've been around. I remember when Snow Beach returned, and it was like everyone's head was exploding at the same time because, for folks that didn't know, Ralph Lauren did this collection for Polo called Snow Beach, and it was really cool. And then all the cool low heads wore it, and all these hip hop folks were wearing it, and Wu-Tang and all those dudes wore it, and they basically never did it again. And everyone was trying to collect vintage Snow Beach. And then one day they said, "Hey, Snow Beach is back." And so they're able to sell, just tons and tons off of like memories of just the brand that existed. And it's really interesting to see how some of those folks do it, because sometimes I'm like, well, wait, does this mean there's no cards left? I mean, or is this, and I love Ralph. So everyone that's listening to this, even Ralph folks that are listening to this, like I'm always going to stand behind it. But it's an interesting perspective that where it's like this new tool that you can use, especially now where like all millennials just love nostalgia. It's like why a Ninja Turtles collaboration all of a sudden sells out, where it's like, really? Yeah,
totally. Well, like the bear, I mean, how many, like there are people probably on the third bear now, right? The sweater. I mean, like I had the bear sweater, and then it coming back, that was a big purchase. Like that was crazy.
Yeah.
I don't know if you remember.
I think for sure. Yeah. The Polo Bear.
Day, they were like $89 or something. I mean, I don't even know how I got one.
Yeah.
But it was, and then when that came back, so much nostalgia. It makes you wonder, like, should I be wearing a bear right now? Like,
it is interesting. Sometimes you're like, yeah, if I'm dressing like myself when I was 13 or 15, what does that say about how I feel right now? No, you're right. I feel like I had some good tips when I was younger, but yeah, I wrestle with that too. You mentioned motion a lot. Where did a lot of this stuff come from you? Like, what was kind of your life like when you're making stuff? Are you like tapping into youth at the same time, or what?
I think I grew up in, so you're in St. Louis?
Yeah.
Okay. I grew up in Concordia, Missouri, which is sort of town outside of a town outside of Kansas City, right?
Mm-hmm.
I don't know if you've probably driven by it. I graduated with 38 kids. So,
Obadiah, wow. Okay.
Young. And so it was rural, just like farm town, and everybody wore, I mean, I was in the FFA, that was, I had an
Future Farmers of America, for folks who don't know what that is. Yeah.
Yeah. Like, unironic, like I had the jacket just because you had the jacket, right?
Hell yeah.
And so workwear for me was just, I didn't know there was a thing called fashion until later. And the idea of like being able to have a career in it, making clothes, that just wasn't even a thought that I even though I loved clothing, I never thought like, I wonder who makes this stuff. Mm-hmm. And but that side of things, I think, was super emotional. My dad was a brick mason. And so, he kind of came home with like the perfect Levi's every day, white Hanes tee, V-neck. And that was, flannel shirt, like probably not Red Wings, but something in the vein, mm-hmm. The off-brand Red Wing. And so that was always super emotional. And then I loved denim. I started working at the mall, and, denim was just everything. You probably know, if you're from St. Louis, the buckle. Were you a mall kid?
Yeah.
Like high school?
My first mall job was I worked at Banana Republic when I was 16, slinging Dawson pants. This had to have been 2000, probably. Yeah.
Amazing. Yeah. 99.
Okay.
Same thing. So, and like that was probably inside baseball, but like which mall in St. Louis?
Oh, that's fine. So I would frequent Jamestown Mall, which blew up because they had a movie theater. Really changed the game. And but at there, I think there was like a Sears and a couple stuff. But then I ended up working at like kind of, I'm air quoting, like the nice mall, which was called Chesterfield Mall, which as we speak right now is in the process of getting totally demolished and turning into a new like town square of luxury condos. I don't know how I feel about it.
Jeez.
Yeah, whatever. That's a whole other conversation. But it was my youth. I mean, and because I worked at that mall again, I worked at Hollister in 2003, which was a whole other can of worms.
Yeah.
But yeah, I loved them all.
Very different cultures. You got the Gap culture, you got the A&F culture.
Oh, yeah.
But yeah. So, okay. So Chesterfield Mall, one of my best friends, back in the day, he was the manager of the Buckle at Chesterfield Mall, which is where I worked. That was my store. And this is in 99. The Buckle was like a Midwest chain of specialty store, multi-brand specialty store. And they were sort of like back then a notch below Nordstrom men's. They sold Polo, Z Cavaricci, Gerbeau, like the assortment was for the Midwest, like where I was from. The assortment was about as good as you can get, other than if you went to Nordstrom men's. And most, like in Kansas City, there was one Nordstrom. It was a long way away. So that was kind of the denim, and they sold more denim, I think, than anybody other than the Gap.
Wow.
In that time. And had like something like 100 different brands. So that was probably the beginning for me as far as like emotion, deciphering. I remember we got diesel jeans, and it was like, the music stopped.
Yeah, I got diesels, and that was like the thing for me. Yeah.
Yeah, totally. But yeah, and then in LA, when I moved to LA, trying to learn how to make clothes, I ended up getting a job for some guys that had actually founded Lucky Brand, and they were incredible mentors. That was probably the beginning of like really thinking through. They built clothes. These guys, Gene Montesano and Barry Pearlman, really legends. They built clothes for themselves. Like that was the way, and they built multiple brands. That were wildly successful. Gene built Bongo in the 80s. Gene and Barry built Lucky Brand together. And then they had the Gene Shop in the meatpacking district on 14th Street. They had a couple of other brands.
Yeah.
And their mentality was like, just build what you want to wear, And I picked that up like that. I think that was a great lesson. And I think that's what Ralph does. I really think he builds product that he wants to wear. And I think we've, at Buck Mason, that's kind of, it's a community of guys building stuff that they want to wear.
Right. Well, I want to jump back 1 second. What brings you to LA from Concordia?
So, So I managed a store at 19, the Springfield, Springfield, Missouri, Battlefield Mall.
Yeah. I actually do know. I've been to that mall.
Okay. So I was the store manager of that location. And then, after a couple of years, they had me, I don't know why, but they had me running like Arkansas, Missouri, Kansas, and Illinois. So my week was like, I would jump in the car and I would go to like Joplin, Missouri. Then I would go to Fort Smith, Arkansas, Rogers, Arkansas, and sort of look after all these stores. Super young, and that went on for like my early 20s. By the time I was like 23 or 24, I'd kind of had like 10 years under my belt as, like you probably had a district manager or something like that at the Hollister or whatever. Yeah, I was like that guy that would like come around and, help out the stores. And the guys that I ended up working for, Gene Montesano and Barry Pearlman, I was at this like manager meeting in I don't know, like Omaha, Nebraska, or Kearney, Nebraska, or something. Yeah, where they would bring all the managers in, and Gene and Barry had come in from LA, and they were so cool. They fly in on a private jet. They're dressed to the nines.
You're like, wait,
I've never seen anything
what?
like this. Yeah, exactly. Like, and so it was a Q&A, and the first question was, like, how did you create this? Like, how, like, and Gene looked out in the audience and he was like, you can create this. Anybody can do this. And he sort of gave this whole spiel, like brought the curtain back and talked about how, you can make clothes, you can build a brand. And, I was sort of levitating on the ceiling and thinking, all right, let's go to LA. Let's see what this is about. So I went out to LA to basically find those guys and talked them into hiring me. And, that was it. I sort of figured, okay, I know how to sell clothes. I had put together that in New York, you sell clothes, and in LA, you make clothes. And I mean, even though there are exceptions to that, obviously, with the garment district in New York and such, but, and I wanted to learn how to make clothes. And so that was LA.
Holy shit. I think, and this is obviously, my assumption, incorrect assumption. I feel like I thought you had a totally different career and background before Buck Mason. And it makes way, way, way more sense now why you care so much about making things in America again. Because the thread that, is behind the scenes throughout your entire career is the rapid depletion of American manufacturing. Because during that era that you were at Buckle or whatever, that was probably some of the peak, 20th century American denim manufacturing, where I think it was out in Tennessee, and then what was it? Was it Sites or something? Or there was a bunch of different places that were just full throttle denim. The folks who run Imogene and Willie, they were all linked into that, and so there was so much American manufacturing that was happening, and it had kind of peaked a bit during NAFTA, and then it was all kind of like slowing down. And this is when, you are kind of rising on your own, figuring out how to build your own company, and just seeing America just get ripped to shreds, no pun intended, with clothing manufacturing.
Oh, I mean, well, when back in the early 2000s, all the Lucky Brand stuff was made in the US, and it was made by Mr. Koo. Mr. Koo, the founder of AG, right? And he was doing all the production in the US, or most of it, for Lucky Brand, I believe. And all those folks were making everything here. I mean, Seven for All Mankind, Citizen, AG, Chip and Pepper. I don't know. You remember? Yeah, Chip and Pepper, right? Who else? I mean, there were so many. There are probably hundreds. J Brand, all made in the USA. Page, and then simultaneously, right around the time that we were getting started. I mean, I remember the day that basically American Apparel lost 5,000 jobs. I was driving down to my factory, and Dove was out in front of his factory. He had sort of been exiled, picketing with half of his employees while the other half were still inside. And they were, basically taking, American Apparel overseas. So weird that American Apparel is not made in America.
Yeah. It's quite strange. I mean, it's unfortunately a tale as old as time, as any, manufacturing brand, grows, and blah, 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 capitalism, et cetera, bad debt, whatever you want to say. But yeah, I mean, that's really got to tug on the heartstrings, seeing that in front of you, and also it being what it sounds like was driving you.
I think some of that is definitely true. At the beginning, we really did want to make as much product as we could in the US. I think, traveling internationally and starting to see what the global supply chain really looks like. I mean, I've had amazing experiences in other parts of the country building product with people and in a way that's super soulful. Mm-hmm. So, I mean, I totally embrace the idea of a really conscientious and thoughtful global supply chain, but there are certain categories that I don't think anybody can do better than the US. And I think that's tees and jeans. I mean, you can probably make better jeans in Japan. You can make better jeans in Japan for sure. But there's also a price to that. So I would say Japan, and then, US is shortly after. Tees, I mean, I really like American tees. I feel like there's the infrastructure there, the supply chain works, and it makes sense. You've got the expertise, and I think both on in the Southeast and Eastern PA, where we have our factory, and then also in LA, you can just make wonderful tees at a great value. So I think that supply chain really makes sense.
Well, yeah, and thank you for acknowledging the rest of the world too, because I think I've talked to tons of folks on the show over the years where some folks are ride or die American, almost like an elitism that comes out. Because I think it's one thing when you speak about American manufacturing in a nostalgic way, but I think it turns into a whole other thing when you get into the whole elitism of it, where it's like it really is better, I mean, are the hands American? What sort of thing, are we going to drill down here where it can occasionally get racist, it can get elitist, it can get all these other things. And when you look at how the denim industry has evolved, you have different ethnicities coming to America, rebooting American denim, and folks from different countries, this beautiful melting pot, which I think is incredible. But, it's funny because a friend of mine runs production where they've handled and messed with production all over the world: Japan, Italy, Eastern Europe, Africa, India. India is a new place that's great clothing production right now, and they've found that the best R&D and QC for them, and I've seen this stuff literally on FaceTime calls with them was in China, and it was just jaw-dropping how incredible it was, and on these hand sewing for the shoes that they were making, the boots, and these are all the things that if I could publicly say this stuff, I mean, it's incredible, and I think it's great to be like, look, you don't need to be 100% American manufacturing, 100% Italian, 100% whatever. You can mix it all together, and you can still honor all these different traditions and support a stronger economy, et cetera, happy go lucky, whatever. But I think I'm just grateful that you at least acknowledge that, because some folks are like, no, man, it's just American and everything else sucks. And you're like, well, come on.
Well, it's interesting, like, to shop. I'm sure you do this somewhere. If you shop and you're not looking at, try not to look at labels, both the country of origin or the actual label, like at a multi-brand store. Mm-hmm. And you go in and you're just looking at make and fabric, and you're sort of evaluating the product. And, you might look at a garment and think, oh, this is definitely made in Italy, or this is the jam, right? And then it's like made in Vietnam.
Yeah.
And
Vietnam's doing great right now, manufacturing.
Yeah. I'm surprised all the time at, like, it's, if you have the right designer, if you have the right pattern maker, and if you have the right fabric, and then if there's one factory in whichever one factory owner, maybe it's a boutique factory, and that's where I say, like, you're making product with people. You're not making product with countries, right?
Right.
It's this relationship that you have with the factory owner. Most of what we do is with small to medium sized factories, right? Mm-hmm. And so, it's more about the mentality and the principles that the owner of the factory or the family has, wherever they are. And if you've got alignment there, you can make some great stuff.
Okay. That's a very, that's a great perspective. There's a lot of humbleness in that. Where did that come from?
I mean, I think that probably came from Yvon Chouinard, right? Like, that's his thing. I mean, he was always like, I think that at Patagonia, they made product in Asia, mm-hmm. and they still do, but they make good product. And there was always a perspective of, like, we're going to stick with the same factory for a really long time. We're going to build a relationship, and make this a relational thing. I think he was probably the person that, from his book, that's probably how I first started thinking about that. Like, okay, let's build product with the same factory for 20 years. Mm. I think that's their mentality, or it was their mentality.
Because, you didn't work with Yvon personally, though, right?
No. Just from reading the book.
Because it feels like some of this stuff has got to be a little bit of some Midwest values. I don't know if it's mom and dad pulling out there or whatever, but I think it's hard to have a position that you have where in most cases your biggest enemy is your ego, because you got all sorts of different people coming around you, stroking the ego, people telling you how much money you're worth, how much money you're not worth, how much you need to do this, how much you need to do this. And to kind of peel all that back and to center yourself in a non-bullshit way too, where it's like, well, I meditate every day for 15 minutes. You're like, come on. Sorry. But like that, I think those things are usually instilled at a much younger age. So I'm just kind of curious if you've ever looked through that.
I think I'm curious. I'm just curious. Like, that's probably more what's driving it. And you try to be super relational, right? Like, I've just, everything that's gone well for me has come from, like, long-term relationships, people that you've worked with for a really long time. I mean, that guy that hired me at the Buckle when I was 16, Darren's still in my life. Like,
really?
Amazing. Yes, absolutely. An amazing guy. I had all these mentors back then during that time of my life. And in fact, one of them, who was kind of in a way my boss, I just hired to be our executive vice president of stores.
Whoa.
And he was,
okay.
Yeah. And so, I think that's sort of my approach is, how do you, trust, build long-term relationships. So, and with, like, the international supply chain conversation or the domestic supply chain conversation, I don't know. I don't know where it comes from. It probably comes from just, that working.
Yeah. I mean, I think it's great. I mean, when people ever ask me for advice in the industry, I'm like, don't be an asshole. Like understand that everything, it's such a small industry, and everyone that you talk to is is not so much going to remember what you did for them, but more of like how you acted when you interacted. Like, what was your character? Like, do you stay in touch with them? And it's not about sending people Christmas cards, but just like being a good and honest person. I think, at least for me, because I come from nothing. I don't have any money. I don't have any prestigious education. It's just like, oh yeah, I know Jeremy. He's a nice guy. And I'm like, damn, okay, mission success. Mission accomplished. We did.
It's amazing what one conversation or one person can do in putting someone over the edge to like take a risk like that. I think that's really cool. And it's really important to remember, like now, like obviously, people, we're lucky to have influence, right? And I think about that with my team sometimes, have someone come to me and ask, like, they're interested in starting their own label or interested in, and it's I think it's so important to like look for reasons that you can encourage someone to like step out and try it. But I had people like that growing up that, sort of gave you the, you could do that. Like you could do that maybe, and you sort of go, you think? Like, I was thinking about doing it, and it just can be enormous.
Yeah, I mean, it's huge. I mean, what was the thing for you then? Well, I mean, was it just that meeting where that's saying that you could run your own clothing company?
I had one boss, his name's Jim Colbo, and he was like a regional vice president at the Buckle. And anytime I came to him with ideas, he was just like, I would come to him with the craziest, totally outside the box, things that probably didn't fit into the framework of what we were doing. But he was always so supportive. And, he would sort of like reward my outside the box thinking, just by saying, hey, I recognize that you're thinking outside of the framework. And I love that perspective. I love that take. He was probably the first one that, sort of made me feel like, because I was pretty rebellious from an ideation standpoint, I've always been really rebellious. Like, I don't want to, I didn't want to build Buck Mason the way that the other companies were built. I just don't like conventional wisdom or conventional thinking has always sort of bored me, I think, in some ways. And he was the first person that sort of saw that as a positive and as an asset, versus like, usually it's like, oh, okay, fall in line, man. Like, let's go, like this is what we're doing here. And and then also Gene and Barry, those guys, I mean, they were so far out, I mean, in their thinking, like they were willing to take enormous risks and did not care at all about conventional wisdom. And that was, I think gave a lot of confidence.
Yeah. I mean, it's interesting how much that stuff really sticks with you too, when you kind of look back on it, because it's not so much about some sort of prosperity thing, or it's like, oh, I took this job in X field so I could make this much money to go do what I really wanted. I mean, all these things were just more about people around you. A friend of mine, he's super smart, and we'll always like get on the phone and talk about different things. And I remember I'd worked for a company and I was trying to work on something, and I was like, hey, I had this idea to do this and this. And they were just like, no. And I was telling him, and he's like, dude, you got to be wary of any boss who's intimidated by your ideas. He's like, that's bad, man. He's like, jump ship. And I was like, what? He's like, trust me, it's not going to end well. And he was right, And totally. I was just like, damn. And I think that's a thing too, because when people talk about like working with like different, Gen Z or millennials or whatever, and they're like, oh man, everyone just wants money. Everyone's money. And I get it. Everyone needs a good, healthy amount of money to live, to be secure, to pursue their job. I want to be very clear. But I think more people are motivated by like a path, right? Like a career trajectory and security, and the security to make mistakes and to dream big and to do stuff like that. It's so important to have that type of relationship and to create that culture. So
totally. I also, one thing I look for in leaders, managers, I want to hire people who are unafraid of hiring people who are better than them.
Oh yeah. Yeah.
And that's so hard to find, right?
It's true. A lot of ego, especially in fashion.
Yeah, totally. And I mean, the person who's willing to hire a team of people who are smarter than them is like the most valuable person in the organization. It's so rare, and I think that it reminds me of I was working for this company for several years, and I was kind of like the general manager of the company, right? There were the owners, and then I was like the I don't know what sort of like COO type of role, right? And things were going really well. I think that I was getting all this feedback, positive feedback, that I was sort of like the third musketeer. Everything was going great, right?
Nice.
And so I was like, okay, I got a lot of confidence, and it was time for my contract to be renewed. And so as part of my new contract, I asked for 1% of the company over 5 years, 20 basis points per year, and no salary raise, right? So I was going to keep the same salary, and then I was going I wanted to receive 1%. The company was probably worth $2 million, right? Nothing. I mean, it was not worth a lot of stuff.
Yeah. My
equity would have been, at that time,
smart move,
not very valuable.
Really, really great negotiating idea.
And the answer was no, right? The answer was no. It was just like, it was a hard no. And it that made me, I was so confused, because I'm sort of like, you're telling me that I'm such a big part of the organization.
Yeah.
Like on the daily, right?
Yeah.
And so, at Buck Mason, we give every full-time person equity. Even if it's a small amount, but every person receives equity. And because you actually want people to participate in the success and be a part of the ride, and you want them to feel ownership, because you're telling them all these things like, we want you to be entrepreneurial. Why would I be entrepreneurial if I'm not an entrepreneur?
Bars. Wow.
Right? So it's like,
that's true.
It's wild. Like we really want to participate in these enterprises that we're involved with. Like we don't want to just punch a clock. None of us do. We really want to get involved and like have a piece of the pie and participate, take the ride, and also contribute. And I see that so often, where you have people that are capable of absolutely extraordinary things, but we just don't let them loose.
Yeah, I mean, and I think that's the thing too, where you're talking about like contributing, where I think it's more rare now to meet someone that just has such a strong ego, where they're just trying to do their own thing, and they're gonna knock down anyone who gets in their way. Most people want to be a part of a larger system, and something where they can make impact, they can be, they can be showcased, but they're a part of something that's going to educate them. I think that's a mindset that I think many people really have. And when you look at people who own companies who are really terrified of giving any sort of ownership, in most cases, sometimes it's like, wow, do you really think this is all you're ever going to amount to, is what you're doing right now? Like Paul McCartney talks about this all the time. When they were like, man, they're like, how did you survive when you didn't have the ownership of the Beatles songs? And it was so, and he's like, it wasn't so much that I couldn't write, he's like, I wanted it because I'd created it, but he's like, but I can just write another song, he's like, I can make it something again. Like it wasn't that like, that was all that it was ever going to be, you know?
That's so funny. I look at myself as an employee way more than I do as an owner.
Right.
Like I totally resonate with that perspective of like, I do think that in a lot of ways we started Buck Mason because there just wasn't an organization like it, so that we could be a part of it. And partly because my partner and I think got to the point where we were a bit unemployable. But I now look at it so much more as like, how can I contribute? I want to be a contributor. I'm constantly asking myself, like, am I contributing enough? And then you assemble like a board of directors so that you can receive feedback and have a team that is mentoring and educating you. I totally agree with that. Sometimes it's like the only reason that you start something is that like there just isn't anything like it, and you cannot get it out of your mind. I've heard people say that like you should only write a book if it just will not go away. The idea or the thought refuses to leave. If not, don't even think about it. And I think in a lot of ways that was Buck Mason. It would not leave. It wouldn't go away. And then it wasn't like we could just go be with a company like it, or at least it didn't feel like that to us at the time.
Yeah. I mean, so it sounds like also you probably wouldn't have been able to start Buck Mason and run it the way it is now if you hadn't been through such a shit show. What a gauntlet of stuff.
Yeah, totally. And I mean, it sounds like kind of like you. I mean, I had I was in middle management for what seemed like forever. Like I'd been, I'd spent so much time. So I'd spent so much time doing a lot of the things that I would end up doing at Buck Mason for others, so it felt like a natural, a lot of the tasks and a lot of the things even that I do today, it's like, it's so repetitious because, I've been in the same industry for 24 years. So anyway.
Yeah. Well, so now you're back in Pittsburgh.
Yeah.
What brought you back there? What brought you back to the Midwest, from LA?
Yeah, I never thought that would happen.
Join the club.
So my wife's from here, and we had our daughter, and right at the beginning of the pandemic, we sort of had this opportunity. We thought about it, and we thought, well, we'll try it for a year. See if it works. And the first year was a total shock. 15 years in LA, and then I moved to Pittsburgh. I mean, I live in this amazing little town, sort of in the country, and it's slow. It is so slow. But it's so charming, and there's like the people in Pittsburgh are so uninterested in like what's cool or what's happening. They just do not care,
Right. Yeah.
There's just not there's just no scene, and that's been amazing to just be completely like to be completely removed from any type of pretense around like what's cool or what's interesting or what's happening, with my wife and I both being in sort of like artistic, creative fields, and, being used to that has just been the most amazing experience. And to just build, great relationships with, amazing folks, but, not always in like the artistic or creative world, that's been interesting. I mean, what's it been like for you?
The exact same. I mean, I'm nodding my head for folks, who are listening to this while he was explaining it. Because I think at first, I don't think I realized how elitist I had been just unconsciously, where, and it's not like, oh, I don't go to Starbucks, whatever. I will say I don't go to Starbucks because I don't respect how Howard Schultz treats his employees, but that's a whole other discussion. But like I was very spoiled by having an extremely diverse, extremely competitive lifestyle in New York. And I was also in this echo chamber of individuals who you had a lot of sort of iron sharpens iron. Most of my conversations were about what we all, like any other relationship, what we all loved, which was like clothing or fashion or something, and obviously New York's an incredibly diverse place, all sorts of people from different backgrounds and different, but like any place that you live, you do kind of start to make friends through a specific common interest, right? Like this is just Freudian crap, right? And we moved here, and no one around us cares about what has been, how I've made a living for, no one cares about that. They care about, the fact that we both have kids, or that, I also have a house that looks similar to theirs, or, I also have issues with moles in my yard, like something that's just, and I think it's been really, really refreshing, and it's helped recenter and reframe, that I need to have much more gratitude in my life. And I've really tried to focus on that. It's also been great. I mean, my dad's health is horrendous. And so I get to see him, and I get to just sit with him. And that's also been very heavy to just process that, in which, and I think, I'm not saying this was everyone that was in a bigger city. But for me, I was just so focused on refinement, improvement, more, better, growth, big, that I just really started to not like myself as well.
Sure.
And coming here, I definitely feel like I'm in the best of both worlds because I'm in New York about like once a month. So I get to go there and I'm like, what the hell am I doing here? Why did I just pay $11 for this stupid coffee from St. Ambrose, whatever, and then I come back here and then I'm like, what the hell? I love my Target. And then I'm like, why am I just going to Target all day? What, and you just kind of.
No, but they work so. They work so well. I mean, I'm in a similar situation to you. I'm in LA every month, so and I'm often in New York as well. But the slowness and pace and the ability to like just sit down and read a book or like sit. I have this little cafe that I just sit outside and I'll work or I'll read or I'll like talk. I just talk to people. Like. Sounds crazy. And you do that in LA and you do that in New York and you do that in other places, but there's something about a slowness and pace and sort of that I have found and just the lack of a scene that I have found totally liberating. And I don't know. I love the big cities, and I don't know. I'm sure we'll probably. I don't know how long this will be, or but with little kids, feels right for us.
Yeah, I mean, I think that was the other thing too. And I'll say this because it's not so much like, oh, New York sucked and I left. I still love it. It's still, or in many ways, like I feel like I'm the most home. But I also recognize that I was, based on where I was in my life, I was also somewhat poisoned by the place that I love the most. And I think that's the biggest thing for someone who might DM me or something hearing this. And truth be told, we just couldn't afford it. We couldn't make it work with the priorities of the life that my family was trying to embody of just, I wanted my kids to be they're both in daycare or actually my daughter's in public school now and it's a great school and my son's in daycare and so that life is just really rewarding, and also getting to see my kids getting to be around their family, is just been such a blessing, to sound like some sort of, pioneer woman thing. But I mean, it's great. And I think it's really helped me understand more about the priorities of, so many other people in my community. And I think it helps me be more of an empathetic listener, storyteller, when you realize that like not everyone cares about, quote, getting a fit off, right? Like they don't, and that's okay. And we can laugh about that and we can use these things that can, bond us. But like, there are people that have very real problems. And I think when you can listen to those things, I mean, it really, as a consultant or business person, whatever you want, it really does help you make a better understanding. I mean, which, watch this transition here, right? Like, which really, I'm the most fascinated by how Buck Mason has like quadrupled down on physical retail in a place when everyone's like, this is such a bad idea. And you guys appear to be crushing it and starting to become the lifeblood of the streets that you pop up on. I'm curious about that evolution and if any of that had to do with you relocating.
Well, I mean, didn't have anything to do with me relocating, but I have to say that part of the business, I mean, it is so much fun. I mean, bonding, like there's nothing better than bonding. I want to have you in my store right now. I would love for you to, I want to like serve you and have you come in and like, I would love to work with you as a client. I mean, that is so much fun. That's like the greatest. You get to bond over, the product that you made and the product that, a person might have interest in, and then creating an environment, I mean, that's our store. We want our stores to feel residential, and I'm much more inspired by hospitality than I am, retail. I've always taken my cues from, like you want a store to feel the way that you feel when you walk into your favorite hotel lobby, right? And I think there's that, but then there's like the greeting and the experience that you receive. And actually, I mean, the Armory does this very well. The guys there, I always go to the one up on Madison, and the guys are amazing. But I think that that's always been a passion of ours, and the stores work because of the product and because of the people. And then early on, we kept them small. I mean, our first store in New York was like 400 square feet. Now it drives me crazy because I can only fit, a fourth of the product. I mean, I'm so not over them, but I'm just ready for the new expression. And we have a new store opening in Flatiron that it will be much larger. So, but the I mean, and Sasha and I had a store when we launched Ecom, and it was tiny. It was behind a bus stop in Venice that was on Venice Boulevard. Mm-hmm. And I mean, we had zero traffic. Like the only traffic were like people that we would invite over from the coffee shop, and that experience, we slowly built that business, and that store kind of became like the format. And we always wanted to have a physical expression, even though we kind of like came up as a D2C brand, and e-com was a big part of what we did at the time. I think that the store expression is it's really important, and we love that part of the business. I don't think it's going away. I mean, what are your thoughts on it?
No, I don't think retail is going away at all. My friends friends of mine who are in the industry, who are doing retail, most of them are way up, in terms of growth and percentage. Like they're doing better. I would say the ones that maybe are struggling right now might have thrown themselves into a lot of different verticals simultaneously and just overextended themselves, which is common across any industry. I don't think when people's like, I don't know, retail may be down. It's like, well, is it? Because retail is community, and community is not going anywhere. Like everybody wants someone to hang out with. They want someone to talk about whatever pop culture sports thing, which I think is always really interesting when you see folks do coffee shops or some sort of non, clothing based thing in a clothing store, because it creates community. And it's just, and it's interesting because British club culture, right? There's a lot of times it's just like you want a place to hang out, and the club culture, it has its own sort of issues over time, right? If certain people couldn't get in or whatever, of how to be dressed. But just the fact of having a place to go and hang out. I mean, I was in New York the other day and we had finished dinner and it wasn't that late, but none of us really wanted to drink or get nuts, but we still wanted to hang out and just talk. And we really couldn't find a place to just go sit. And I was like, man, I wish a store or something was open late. Cause I'd buy some clothes right now, or or just a place to go sit and chill. And, it makes you realize more. It's people just want community. And so when the retail store and experience, can be that in addition to commerce, then I don't think they're going anywhere. So
no, I totally agree with that. It's also, I'm curious about a lot of my friends, maybe it's just the age, but a lot of my friends aren't wanting to drink as much. It's a trend. I don't drink. It is a trend. I don't drink, but a lot of my friends are, going from, they'll still drink, but they'll drink just a little bit. And that leaves you with, okay, where do we go? What do we do?
That was exactly what happened with us. We were like, really? Well, yeah, we don't want to get plastered,
Sure.
We're all in our approaching our 40s or in the middle of our 40s or whatever, where it's just we just kind of want to hang out. And you're exactly right. I think restaurants are dealing with this too when they make a lot of money off alcohol, where they're just we're doing, mocktails. I'm air quoting that word, or, or NA stuff, because anyone will pay a ton for a fun drink, but you don't need to get lit out of your mind in the process.
Yeah. Well, if you're anything like me, when you go on a work trip, it's your chance to sleep.
Exactly. Yeah. I know exactly what you mean. Yeah. It's fantastic. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, I think that, the idea of a retail store that thinks far beyond selling clothing, that's it's gotta be I think it has to be a mindset. And they're set up you go in and there's 100 mannequins everywhere. What do we really need? What are we doing with all these mannequins?
Yeah.
Is that really is that really what you want to say? Yeah. And then also the team, how do you find a group of people that are excited about the product and want to, bring that experience to the customer. I mean, that's a difficult situation if you're thinking it kind of with an old school mentality, right? Like, not gonna like pay someone $15 an hour to like,
right,
articulate. This is a marketing role. This is a marketing position, right? This is a person who you're asking people to tell your story.
mm-hmm.
So you've got to think about that totally different. I mean, there needs to be incentives. There needs to be a way to, again, offer ownership. So like our store managers are cut in to the P&L, and they have full visibility of the P&L, and they manage.
That's not
their
normal
own
for listeners, by the way.
Yeah. And then they're heavily incentivized to build a business. And I think that it's kind of like I think you've got to revamp the whole thing if you want to make it feel more like if you want it to be a more personal, thoughtful, conscientious experience.
Yeah, I mean, a friend of mine, at one point we were like debating starting a business, through different things, and we found ourselves in this situation where it's like, I think the best retail, you don't really need to have retail employees that sell product, right? You just need to have a really, warm and hospitable environment, and the product will sell itself because people just want to hang out there. And eventually they're gonna be like, all right, I saw someone else in these jeans or this, and I'm just doing it. And we were like, but one thing is like trying to get reservations at other places or knowing where to go or where else to be. Like, it's easy to communicate like, hey, this is where you should shop and this is our store, come visit us. But then being like, come visit us, we're going to get you a reservation at here. Obviously very difficult to scale. But I think just that mindset of coming here, hanging out. I mean, Sid Mashbird's tried to do that, throughout some of his stores in Atlanta. And where it's like, come hang out, relax. A friend of mine, he runs a small store, and he used to never let any of his employees sit down while they were there. If no one was there, you could sit down, but he was just like, if someone walks in and you're sitting down, you're going to lose that sale. And that was like his dad, because it was like his dad's store. And now he's like, no, we want to be disarming, like you don't want to look like aloof. There's a big difference. But he's like, if you're sitting down, you want it to be kind of relaxing. You want this to be more of a club, more of, versus, shine your shoes, sir.
That's so funny you say that, because one of our rules for the corporate people is that if you're traveling stores, you never sit down in a store.
Oh, interesting.
When you're traveling stores and you're out there working with the team, whoever you are from the HQ, you're sort of like, the minute you walk in, you're participating.
Oh, that makes sense.
You're part of the team.
Yeah.
You're part of the team, and you're not like just chilling. But I totally agree with this perspective that like you want it to be a hang.
Yeah.
And so that has changed things for us as well, and how you sort of think about like crafting that experience. You're exactly right. It might be cool if you walk in and, the team is chilling, having an espresso or whatever. And I think that, it's tough, especially when you start thinking about, okay, now we're going to try to figure out how to master this in like 50 of these or 100 of these, and I think what you have to do is give people autonomy.
Yeah. I mean,
there has to be freedom.
Yeah, that makes perfect sense, because yes, it's true. Someone's going to hear this and be like, well, I have, 99% tourists in my store or something, and I can't do that because that's signaling A, B, and C. Of course. Obviously, like, yeah, you're right. Like, be your best judge on that stuff. And I think that makes the most sense. But for some places, yeah, it might make sense to, like, what are the things that when you go to other stores that throw you off? Well, do the opposite of that in yours. It's just like, use your best judgment. Yeah. Yeah, I mean, it's I forgot where I was at the other day, and it was like a line to get in the store, and I was like, I wonder how many potential sales they're losing by just people who see the line and they're like, F it, like I can't do it, and that's not a bad thing. You're doing well, right? I mean, if there's a line to get in your store, way to go. But I'm like, well, how does that stuff exist? When I think about companies like, Supreme would have it, or Aimé Leon and all these places where, how many people would walk by and drop, $2-3 grand just trying to get something in?
Yeah, one of my friends just said this to me. They said, could you imagine if you flew to New York and on your list, was to go to these few stores, and, you're like trying to catch a flight or whatever, you only have a little window, and you go and there's like, you're not on the list, or there's no line and you can't get in, like, can you imagine what that would feel like? And so we've never done lines. I mean, some of our stores are so small that they are ridiculous. Like
the Novita
Saturday,
store, it's a tiny store.
Oh, I mean, it's just, it's tiny, and like, it's a really, it can be, not a great experience if you come when it's busy. But the idea of like setting up a line, that's never felt right to me. You know, it feels exclusive. You want it to be inclusive. And, obviously the solution is build bigger stores, probably, but I don't know, I've never thought, and then the thing about the lines that is always confusing to me, if you wait in line, but then you get in there and like nobody's really in there. And
and I think this is the most challenging thing for retail stores now is catering to a very diverse type of customer, where some want no attention, some have no desire or expectation to buy in store. They just want to showroom the store and they're going to purchase online, and you have all of those simultaneously. And then you just have a random person who's like, I need a shirt, and I walked past here. Someone told me to get a shirt here, and I think it's really difficult to serve all of them equally well.
I know. And you end up hiring for people that have super high EQ.
Yeah.
Right. You're sort of looking for people that can recognize, who wants what. And often if you want people with a super high EQ to work in your store, you need to hire people that have less experience, because if they have a lot of experience, they're going to be qualified to do other roles. Like they'll be managing, they'll be managing a store. They'll be, like director of marketing or whatever. But you can get inexperienced people with a super high EQ that actually have really great taste and decent communication skills, I think, if you go more inexperienced.
Right.
But also hiring like the jaded, the people who like clothes, but sort of like hate the clothing industry.
Oh yeah,
like that is not who you want in the stores.
Yeah, that's
very common.
Yeah, that's very true. I mean, there's been a handful of stores you go to, and like people are like, this person just doesn't want me here. And you're like, yeah, because you ruined their TikTok story when you walked in. It's like, I agree, they probably shouldn't have been doing it, but that was what they were doing, and that's why they don't like it.
Totally.
Yeah,
man.
It's gnarly. Well, we're starting to wrap up, but I did want to kind of go through a few other things. What have been the stuff that's been kind of driving you lately? Whether it's an album, a movie, a trip, an experience, but just kind of like, how have you been kind of disconnecting and resetting yourself?
On the reconnecting and resetting myself, that's basketball, actually.
Go on. As an NBA or playing it?
Both. Both. So basketball was my first love. I actually played basketball in college for a year. That was the plan. I was going to take that as far as I could take it. And I gave it up. I put the ball down at 19 and really didn't play for 15 years. And then when the pandemic happened, I started playing at my local Y.
Okay.
And it has become a full-on obsession. I mean, I'm like completely back in playing, of like regular schedule. And it's such a complete release. And that, I can kind of go and just completely disconnect. 2 hours later, it's like waking up, anew.
Wow.
So,
how's your mid-range jumper?
It's coming along.
Okay. Yeah.
It's coming along. Yeah. But it's weird because as you get older, you have to completely change your game, right? Like everything changes and you have to you can't do anything that you used to be able to do. And if you try, you just look silly. So you have to kind of figure out where you are in the process and what skills you still have, what skills you don't have. So it's really great, like mentally to, actually be brutally honest with yourself. And figure out where you are. So that's been a big one.
Yeah. I was going to say, I take it you're a Steve Nash fan then, as talking about reinventing yourself. Yeah.
Absolutely love Steve Nash. And the NBA right now is amazing. I mean, do you watch?
Absolutely. It's the only sport that I love everything about. I mean, I love and also when you look at every other American sport right now, the NBA, I think, is the one that's growing the most. I mean, someone's going to say, oh no, MLS or F1, like, sure. But like the NFL is too dangerous, not long enough, I'm sure it's got the Taylor Swift bump, but like, MLB, you don't have any superstars, you don't have the kind of Michael Jordan, LeBron James style person that's like in the culture representing the league, that's also serving as a way to recruit. I mean, there's not really a pipeline to bring people back in, so you don't have a larger market cap. I mean, just the business of the sport as a whole. And I'm not trying to sound like Bill Simmons, but like you look at all that stuff. But like the NBA, for me, it's just a sweet spot. The games are short. Yeah. The MLB did do some better stuff by putting the pitch clock in this past season. Right. I mean, because I do love baseball, but I have very few friends outside of St. Louis, because St. Louis is a big baseball town, that like baseball. They like the baseball culture, but I feel like my friends that like NBA, they like to debate the NBA. They like to talk about NBA culture. They also like to watch the game and critique the game and talk about everything that's happening. They're so in it. And it's not our age. I think it's just the sport is so accessible for that. It's a player's game.
Do you think basketball is the most artistic sport?
I don't know. So I think soccer could be, but I think it's much more difficult to understand. I think basketball, especially if you're like a Spurs fan, when you look at like great coaching, you look at the Spurs and like the mid-aughts, or Golden State when they had their perfect season. I think that's really artistic, because you get to see like different levels of teamwork and conditioning and non-Jordan ball. Like that's why, like, I don't care about the 96 Bulls. Like I just don't. Like there was cool stuff there, but I think because I didn't really get to understand it the way I did. Someone's gonna be like, Jordan was the GOAT, and it's like, yeah, but like Jordan was also like a gambling maniac and was probably not the person people want to aspire to be. Versus LeBron James has hundreds and hundreds, probably in thousands now, of children who have an education because of his foundation. Like that's real impact. Like, and so like seeing all that, and surviving, not just as an athlete, but as a person that someone aspires to be, it's really tough to make that connection across other sports. I don't know.
Yeah. It's soccer and basketball are the two that I think of because there's so much fluidity.
Yeah.
Like, whereas how like when you think about the MLB or NFL, there's sort of a play and then the play stops, right? And then in the NBA or in basketball, you're potentially free, for a pretty long period of time. You could be completely free 4, 5, 6 trips down the court.
Yeah.
And you can move anywhere at any time.
Yeah.
Right?
It's true.
You have this ball and you're sort of like, you like the more advanced you are, same thing with soccer, right? The more advanced you are with this ball, the things that you can do with it are remarkable. Yeah. And when you watch someone like, current like Steph Curry or like Ja Morant or some of these people that what they can do with the ball is like mesmerizing. And I just think of it as like such a creative endeavor. And then I read that Bill Russell was really thought of himself, he wanted to be an artist. That was he grew up, he thought he was going to be an artist. And when he got onto the basketball court, he sort of like, that he thought that this was sort of like an art form. And there's a great documentary about him. And I don't know. I think it's such and then what's interesting is the NBA guys have style and they have such great instincts. A lot of them have really great instincts, I think, around dressing, and culturally they always seem like they're just a part of the zeitgeist in a way that's maybe different from the other professional sports leagues. And I just wonder if basketball sort of attracts creative people.
I think it does. I think also the NBA is a players league versus an owners league. Like when you look at NFL is an owners league, MLB is an owners league. There's not, in the NBA, one of the biggest things that happen, is a lot of these guys, they can have their own podcast. They can talk. They can be themselves or the person that they want to try to be, for better and for worse, right? I mean, everyone hated Kyrie for all the, stuff, but like, they can have that personality and they can still play the game, and that can exist simultaneously versus, if you were out of line on some of these other sports, or, you're never going to do better than the owner. You never, and I feel like I'm much more about, empowering the individual versus like the system at large. And it's because some people are like, no, NFL is just the greatest. And I get it. And there is a lot of art to the NFL. I do think people like Patrick Mahomes is an incredible athlete and stuff. And I'm not dunking on him, but it's when I think of like how approachable and how, these other sports can be, and the amount of games, et cetera. Like, yeah, I love League Pass. I'll just say it there, man. League Pass, sponsor the pod, please. Like, it's just like, I love it so much. But yeah.
Totally, man.
Well, that's good. So you're playing sports. Good for you. That's a good disconnect.
Yeah. There you go. There's the reset. There's the reset.
Nice. Well, Erik, I think that's a good place to wrap. Thank you again.
Thanks a lot, man.
It was great to meet you. Talk to you soon.
Great to meet you as well.
See ya. All right, that's it for today's show. You've been listening to Blammo. Our show is produced by Blammo Media. We're edited by Amar Lal. Our theme music, as always, by the mysterious Breakmaster Cylinder. If you like what you heard, share the pod with a friend. Leave a review on Apple Podcasts, 5 stars on Spotify, or whatever it is you do. You can follow us on Instagram for all the hot content at Blammo Podcast. And if you want to talk to us and give us your hot take, we'd love to hear from you. You can leave us a message or email us. Actually, just email us at info@blammopod.com. And last but not least, if you want to hang out with us, you're like, I need all the Blammo I can. Well, first off, dig through the archive because we have hundreds of episodes in there. But you should join us on the Blam Fam. It's patreon.com/Blammo. And we got tons of exclusive episodes on there, including our exclusive shows, which is Blammo Presents Dye Workwear, the Triple J Show. It's all in there. Dive in. Happy holidays, everyone. You like that? A big tie into the intro. Okay. See you later.